Good morning, my favourite humans, or good midnight, or 1 a.m. It looks like it is for some of you, and hopefully everything is working properly this time. Looks like I've got about a 10-minute lag. No audio. Oh, don't tell me that. Dodgy, are you trying to give me a heart attack? Everything working? Oh, Zach, hey, good to see you. Yes, Sion, you are human. Alright, so the first thing I wanted to talk about today was to get an update from all of you about how you're going. But it will probably take a little while for comments and things to come through in the chat. So while you're answering that, because I'd like to know how everybody is faring at the moment, whether you are having trouble with lack of supplies for your projects, whether you're managing to get through things, are you doing more or less, are you feeling okay about life? So while you're thinking about that, a quick update on what I want to do with these live streams. So I've been thinking a little bit about this and talking to people on Discord about it. And what I want to do is try to make this a regular weekly event. Probably, I think this time, 10 a.m. Sunday Melbourne time is reasonable. It's pretty horrible for most of Europe, but unfortunately, I can't really find a time that suits everybody. That's the nature of the world being an oblate spheroid that rotates. So I think 10 o'clock every Sunday is okay. And also, I don't want to make it too long. I might end up doing other live streams where I talk through things. Like if I'm working on a project, I might start streaming that while I'm working on it. But that's a different thing. For these Sunday morning type events, what I'd want to do is talk about something specific and be directly engaged with you watching it and interacting with you rather than having you looking over my shoulder while I'm spending hours working on something. I mean, that's cool too. It's just a different type of thing. And so do like 1 or maybe 2 hours on a Sunday. Also, there was a really good suggestion on the Discord. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Osh or Dodgy or James, who suggested that after a regular episode comes out, like a normal video, the live stream that follows it could be like a Q&A related to that video. So I think that's a really good idea. And so the last video that came out was part 2 of the air quality display sensor, air quality sensor with the display model. So if there are questions about that today, cool. I'm almost ready to go with part 3. I'll get back to that in a second. And the other thing that I would really like to do with the Sunday morning live streams is bring on either guests or just bring people on to ask questions. And I could probably do that using StreamYard, which is what MakerCast uses. Also, if you don't know about MakerCast, you should check that out. It is a group of makers who have YouTube channels, and once a month they get together for a live stream, typically with about 5-ish people on the live stream, and they talk about what they've been working on that month, different projects and things. So it's pretty cool to see. It's like a panel discussion type thing. So where do we get hold of that? Like if you search for MakerCast, you should be able to find it. It's hosted on a different YouTube channel each month. So the tool that's used on that is StreamYard, which is a way of bringing in multiple live streams into a single place and then being able to have like a panel discussion. So one option is to run this through StreamYard, and then people can join it, ask a question, we can talk about a topic, and then they can jump off and someone else can jump on. Alternatively, we could just do audio through Discord or some other tool, which could be fun. So I want to make it so that it's people on here talking to me, not just me talking to the camera, which can get pretty boring after a while. in terms of the structure of regular videos, you would have seen that I've done part 1 as the basic model, part 2 is the display model of the air quality sensor, and that's going to be at least a 4-part series, possibly 5. This is part of an experiment that also partly came out of discussions on Discord, because when I started recording the part of the video that was about explaining the source code and how it works, that to me is it drags. And going through source code line by line and saying this is how this works and this is why I did it this way, it can be very interesting if you are specifically interested in that and you want to understand that particular part of the program. But if I do a project and 30 minutes of the video is me talking through source code, that part of the video is horribly boring for everybody else. So one of the suggestions was to take the source code explanation, pull it out into a separate section, almost like an addendum video. So if people care about that, they can watch that as like supporting material. So what I'm doing at the moment with this air quality sensor project is to break it down into a series of bite-sized chunks. And rather than doing like 45, 50-minute videos, do 20-minute-ish videos and do it in a sequence. And what I can do then is take those videos and put them into a playlist, so that if you want to go through the entire thing from beginning to end, you can do that. Or you can just look at little subsections of it. And so I started with part 1, which was the basic model, part 2, which extended it to make the display version of the project. Part 3 is going to be just me walking through the source code of the sketch that I showed in the last episode and explaining almost line by line, but not in that much detail, how it works and the sequence, like how the state machines work and all of that sort of thing. And then part 4 and 5, one of them will be the pro model of the display, which is the, where is it? I've got one here, which is the version with a PMS 7003. It's on a custom PCB. There's an ESP32 on the back. There's USB-C and RGB LEDs, so it can glow different colors, and it's got a BME 680, so it can do volatile organic compound detection and all that sort of thing. So that's a much more complex project. But the other thing that I want to cover in this series is how air quality standards work and what these numbers actually mean. Like if you get back a number that says your PM2.5 count is 47, what does that mean? Is it a big number, a little number? How does it equate to what's good air and what's bad air? So I've already done a whole lot of graphics showing things like the relative sizes of different types of particles and where they fit in relation to the sensitivity range of these systems, and also how some of the national standards work for reporting air quality. And I'm thinking that, and the other thing I have to cover, of course, is what do you do with the data out of this? So far what we're doing is we're pushing values to MQTT or showing them on the display. But how do you do anything with that? How do you turn it into a chart and report it within your home automation system? So I think that part of it may end up being a whole video on its own. I mean, that could easily take 20 minutes going over that. So I think I'm going to end up probably with a 5-part series by the time I've covered everything. And it'll be interesting to see if this sort of format suits people rather than 45 or 50-minute epics that come out every few months. Try to do 20-minute episodes that come out every couple of weeks. Hopefully it'll be more useful. So, back to the chat, because I've been totally ignoring it while I've been rambling on and on and on. So just scrolling back, I can see a few people asking about the Discord and how to join it. Has anybody given a link in there? Let's see. Doesn't look like it, so I will put one in. That should get you to the invitation page for the Discord, which is a live chat system. And there's been some interesting stuff coming up on the Discord just overnight, so I'll get to that too. So I can see people saying hi from Romania, from the UK, Germany. Oh, Thomas says it's 2:03 in Germany, 2:03 a.m. People all over the place, which is really cool. So, where else? Denmark. Lots of people. Oh, yeah, so regarding MakerCast, Sion, who is the Unexpected Maker, if you're looking in the chat on this, you'll see Unexpected Maker with a little spanner next to his name because I made him an admin or a moderator. That is Sion, who is a regular part of the MakerCast and hosted it on the last one. So go and check out his channel. In fact, I think if you click on his name in the chat, it'll probably take you to his channel, I think. Someone from California, someone from North Carolina. Okay, good point. So Jay After Dark just said Discord won't let me type anything. There is an anti-spam thing in the Discord. When you first join it, you won't have privileges to do anything until you go to the rules channel, or the rules topic. So go up to rules, and then you have to acknowledge the rules by clicking the little thumbs up. That's basically just saying, yes, I accept the rules, and I'm not going to do anything nasty on this Discord. Once you click that, there is a bot that automatically gives you privileges to be able to do whatever you need to do. So you can then post and read and everything. So, make sure. Thanks, Mike. I really feel personally conflicted about spruiking supporting the channel. I usually avoid doing it, but Aaron just said, how do I donate? So thank you very much for asking that question. I really appreciate it. At the moment, the only real mechanism I've got for that is Patreon. And if you go to the SuperHouse site, there is a link on the right-hand side which has a link to Patreon. So if anyone feels like supporting me on Patreon, that would be fantastic. That is now a large part of my income, actually. But I know that people are in really difficult financial situation right now because there is so much uncertainty. I mean, I've seen on my online store, for example, over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, my sales have dropped to about 10% of what they would normally be. So instead of going to the post office 1 or 2 times a day with a big bag of parcels, I'm going maybe once or twice a week with 1 parcel or 2 parcels. So the volume has dropped way off, and I think it's largely because partly because there are so many people that have got reduced work now, lost their jobs, or it's just the uncertainty. Even if you personally are in a good financial situation right now, you don't know how long it's going to continue. So it's not a great time to be committing money on discretionary spending on hobby projects and things. So I think that's why that's happened. So the point is, don't feel obligated to support me on Patreon. I truly appreciate all of you that are. And if you are and you are having financial difficulties, then please feel free to stop and don't feel bad about it. You need to look after yourself and make sure that you're in a good situation. Supporting people like me should be a secondary thing after you look after yourself. So I know quite a few people have cancelled or decreased their Patreon support, and that's fine. Don't feel bad about it. So, where are we? Okay, so little comments here. There's a question from Greg, or a comment from Greg Watts from the mid-United States. Really interested in smart home, but want it to be separate from the internet. Your thoughts? Yes. Someone after my own heart. I totally agree. My thoughts are, if your internet connection goes down and you can't control your lights anymore, then your home automation system is a liability. It's not an asset. So my personal goal and the way that I've set my house up with its architecture is if my internet connection goes down, everything just keeps working. What I really have is two, in my head at least, not really hard to find, is two classifications of functionality within the house. One is the core functionality, which has to work no matter what. And that's things like if you walk up to a light switch and you press the light switch, the lights need to turn on or off. And things like that have to happen regardless of the state of your internet connection or some cloud service provider that might have a glitch or get owned or go out of business or whatever. So nothing inside the house that I consider to be critical relies on the internet connection. I do rely on the internal network because I use IP networking through the house for things like talking to the MQTT broker and various other devices, things like my light switch controllers and my switchboard controllers are all on Ethernet. So I'm relying on the Ethernet staying up, but that's an internal service that I have direct control over. And oh, Chris just asked a really cool question about MQTT. I'm going to get back to that. I've got news about that. So then there is a second class of functionality. That is things that do rely on the internet connection, but they're not essential for the house to work. Things like being out away from home, being able to pull up your phone and access functions of the house. Obviously, your internet connection needs to work for that to do anything. But if your internet connection goes down, I don't consider that to be an essential part of using the house. Another would be external data sources. For example, I have an ambient tile in the kitchen, so it's a part of the kitchen tiles. When it was being assembled, I mounted some RGB LEDs behind it, which are being powered by a D1 Mini, which connects to MQTT. So what I can do is make the tile glow different colors and actually make spots on the tile glow different colors. And some of you have probably seen the video about that, because I did a whole episode about it. And what that does is display different things like if it's bin night, which bin needs to go out? Is it the recycling bin or the green waste bin or whatever? But it also displays things that rely on external services. For example, I have a script that runs on my Raspberry Pi that runs my MQTT broker and Node-RED and everything else. Once a day, it goes off to the Bureau of Meteorology site, pulls down the UV values for today, and then if UV is above a certain level, it glows a different color on the tile. Now, if that stops working, nobody really cares. It's a nice little thing, but it's not a core feature of the house. It's not like the lights have stopped working because your internet connection has gone down. So, at the start of this whole rant about this particular topic, I can't remember if I mentioned it, but to follow up my answer to that question about internet connectivity, I did a whole video about it, and it is somewhere back in history. I'm just looking through my list of episodes now. I can't even find things in this list now, even though there aren't that many of them. So, system architecture, no. Oh, I think it might have been in a vlog where I just ranted about it. It must have been. If anyone else beats me to it, please post the link in there, because it's not very interesting watching me just scrolling through a list of old videos trying to find something. Ah, here we go. It was a vlog titled "Help, the Internet Killed My Toaster." So it was this one. So this was my rant about don't let your home automation system depend on external services or internet connectivity. All right, now that's enough from that. Scrolling back, oh yeah, so Zach suggested you'd run a separate physical network and just give it an uplink to the internet on your router with some very tight firewall rules and routes. Yes. In fact, that's the sort of thing that I was going to cover in part 2 of my Bulletproof Wi-Fi series, which I'm still going to get back to. What I've got in my house is I've got Unify managed switches, which means I can create multiple networks, VLANs, and they've got their own range of IP addresses and things, so they're effectively separate networks even though they pass over some of the same copper. And I've got multiple Wi-Fi networks as well. And so what I've got is, for example, a Wi-Fi network which does not have access to anything except the MQTT broker. So what I can do is put sign-offs on it, and they can access MQTT, but they can't access anything else. They can't access the internet, they can't do anything. And they're on their own range of IP addresses, it's on its own SSID, totally isolated. So even if someone comes into my house and I give them the Wi-Fi SSID and password for my main network, they still can't get to those devices. So I've got some level of segmentation there. So I want to talk about that in detail in part 2 of that mini-series. So now getting back to the thing about MQTT earlier. Now, it's too early to give details, but one thing that I personally think MQTT is one of the most useful enabling technologies for any network or any system where you have a lot of devices that you need to link together and you want to have abstraction between the devices in terms of what they are. You want them to be able to interoperate, but they could be from different manufacturers or whatever. So MQTT is the glue that binds everything together. And I think it's really important to understand the fundamentals of it. Now, I can't really give you details right now, but a very good friend of mine, who's actually the guy who introduced me to MQTT many, many years ago and helped me set up my very first mosquito broker, is right now in the process of putting together a mini online course which will teach MQTT basics through to implementing it in your project and getting into some really interesting things in relation to device auto discovery and topic structure and all of those things that I think are really useful and that people keep asking me about. So when the time comes, I'm definitely going to be heavily promoting that, and I think that'll be very useful. So let me get back to these chats and see what I've missed. Sion says, this is in relation to the shipping, or to sales. It said, yeah, the same, my sales have been slow and hit and miss, lots of uncertainty out there. Yeah, I feel your pain, Sion. And Mike said, no shipping to USA. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I went to the post office with an order for the USA last Monday, it was. Yeah, it was Monday morning. And took it up to the counter. And I know the guy who runs my local post office really well. Like, I've been friends with him for years. Been to his house and helped him set up his cameras and done all sorts of stuff. So he's a good friend of mine. And there was someone else working in the post office that day behind the counter, and I walked up with my parcel. It was for the US, and I'd done the customs pre-clearance, so I'd already gone to Australia Post, pre-entered all of the recipient information. I'd got an approval for it. I had the QR code on the package, so it could just be scanned and taken in. And when she scanned it, it came up with an error on the computer, and it was a failure to connect to the US Customs Service to retrieve the package data. And it turned out that over the weekend, the US Customs Service had disabled their external API, I think only temporarily, I think it's back now, so that nobody could lodge packages to ship to the US. And I think that was part of a change they were making so that they could disallow certain classes of package, which includes economy packages. And the result of all of that now is that briefly I could not ship to the US at all. Like I could take a package to the post office and they would just say, we can't accept it. Like there is no way for them to lodge it in their system. It was just broken. But now what I can do is ship packages if they use a tracked service, which means the cheap economy air just doesn't work. I can't lodge it. But if it's going using a trackable service, then it can be accepted. So at least now, as in the last few days, I can ship to the US again, but limited, and it costs more because it's got to be a trackable service, which sucks. Speaking of tracking, the PCBs for my new light switch controller, no, those ones are in production. The other PCBs that I ordered weeks ago finally started moving. They sat in Hong Kong for 8 days, not moving anywhere, and now they're moving again. So hopefully they'll be in Australia later this week. Back to questions. David Webster asked, what about power loss? So I guess that's just a general question. I have a number of UPSs in my house. I've got a UPS sitting in the bottom of the main switchboard, and that is being used to power my network switches and the 2 Raspberry Pis that I have for home automation, the light switch controller, and everything else. So in the event of a blackout, that stuff stays up. It gives me a chance to gracefully shut it down at least. But of course, then without mains, the actual loads don't work, so lights and things don't work, but at least the controller doesn't just freak out. What I would really like to do is set up something like a Tesla Powerwall and be able to keep everything going through short blackouts at least. Okay. This is interesting. John Crunk just said, I'm having some success with Mycroft, hoping it doesn't go the way of Snips. That is an interesting observation, and I don't think it will. The folks at Mycroft seem to be absolutely dedicated to keeping everything open. And I think the only way that could happen, that it could go the way of Snips, would be if they failed financially and it all collapsed and then someone bought their assets and changed the license. From what I've seen online and also talking to people that I know, so one person who is on the Discord is Kathy, who until a little while ago worked at Mycroft, is an old friend of mine, and their whole mission basically has been to provide an open and unencumbered alternative to the walled gardens that we're seeing now with voice assistants. Things, I won't say the names because I'll wake up all of your voice assistants, but systems that can harvest data from the queries that you make, the things that you say. They have recordings of everything that you've said around the time you've said a wake word, not just after the wake word, but for a couple of seconds before it as well. And they've got records of everything you said. They've got background noises, conversations while you're talking to your voice assistant. It's all recorded. It can all be automatically transcribed into text and made searchable. And that is a pretty scary prospect. So one of the primary missions of Mycroft is to create a project or infrastructure or building blocks that allow people to create voice assistants that are truly open source and where the data itself is also under your own control. You're not relying on a third party and trusting them. So of all of the voice assistants around, the one that I would put my my money on right now in terms of one that I would want to use myself and trust is Mycroft. And I'm definitely going to cover Mycroft in future videos. I've got Mycroft gear here and I haven't really talked about it, but it's very interesting. So, okay. Oh, here's an interesting question. Rohit Samanandi asked, what do you think of LoraWAN in home automation? LoraWAN is really interesting and really cool. And this question is interesting because I've pondered it a little bit and I'm not sure that it has a huge place in home automation as such, because the problem that it's trying to solve is not quite the home automation problem. It's more of the citywide sensor network or large area, very low data volume problem. So it is a really interesting technology, and the whole idea of trading throughput for battery life and range is really clever. And I have actually thought in the past, I wonder if it would be useful to do things like make light switches that use LoraWAN, or make general home automation devices that use LoraWAN. And how would that compare to Zigbee or some of the other options out there that allow reasonably low power usage? And in terms of low power usage, I think LoraWAN is probably the winner, but it's more oriented around, I want to get this signal 500 meters or 2 kilometers down there, rather than I want to get this signal, and latency doesn't really matter, compared to I want to get this signal 20 meters and latency does matter. So it's something that I think is really worth exploring, but it's probably not a perfect fit to the home automation problem. Okay. Oh, Chris Davis said, yes, on the Tesla Powerwall, building my own Powerwall with laptop batteries. That's awesome. I would love to do that. I've seen so many DIY Powerwall projects, and every time I see one, I think that would be so cool, but I'd need a source of a huge number of batteries. There are a few people that have worked on open source battery management systems. There is a channel that I watch occasionally, and I've gone blank on the name of it. It is in the UK. There's an electric shed, DIY Powerwall. Something, maybe this will help me find it. Powerwall shed, I don't know. Someone will probably know the name of that particular YouTube channel, and I can't find it right now. Although I think I'm subscribed to it, so let's see. It is worth checking out. Oh, I'm subscribed to 126 channels. That takes a while to go through. There is... Let's see... I can't find it right now. But maybe someone here can find it. There is a UK channel, a guy who has a shed with a DIY Powerwall system in it, and he's built his own battery management system and done some cool stuff. But just randomly scrolling through my huge list of subscribed channels right now, I can't see it. Maybe someone... someone suggested Adam Welsh. No, I don't think it's Adam. Adam does interesting videos as well. But there is another channel that I'm thinking of. Yeah, Adam does these sorts of things as well. Oh well, that's alright. Okay. Other questions? Just scrolling back a little bit. Incognito3 said, those were Australian magpies you could hear just then. Yes, so there were some magpies sitting out on the edge of my roof, squawking away. I don't even hear them because they're doing it so often I don't notice. It's like living next to a railway line, which I did when I was a kid. I used to live about 5 houses away from a major metropolitan railway line. There'd be trains through every 10 minutes. And after we lived there for a little while, I couldn't even hear the trains. Visitors would come over and they'd say, how can you live with that? And I'd say, live with what? Okay. Yeah, Dodgy said the same thing. Tunes them out. Dave Lee said, did you get around to hacking your lawnmower at all? That is a really interesting topic I'd love to get back to. I haven't hacked the mower itself. What I've done is hacked the boundary wire so that I could zone off separate areas, and I want to get back to doing the mower. There is one particular thing that I really want to do, which is I need some kind of a link back. I need a notification when the alarm on the mower goes off. The mower has a piezo alarm inside it, and it's partly used as an anti-theft alarm. So if the mower is picked up, it's got accelerometer and stuff in it. So if the mower is running and you don't unlock it first and then you pick it up, this piezo siren goes off, which is definitely loud, but it's also used in a low volume way as an alert if something goes wrong. And for the last couple of months, I don't know why, my dog has taken to digging in a specific spot in the yard. There is a little hole, and she gets in and digs it, makes a hole that's maybe that big. It's not huge, it's just like scrabbled 10-15 centimeters of dirt down into a little area, but it's enough that if the mower goes over it at the right angle, one of its wheels falls in, it gets stuck, and it then detects that it has no drive, and it sits there beeping its piezo thing for a while until it decides no one's going to come and save it, so it just turns itself off. But often I will be like, I'll walk out through the back door, going from the lab into the back of my house, and I'll see the mower sitting there on the lawn with its back wheel stuck in the hole, and it's probably been there for hours. So what I need to do is open it up, and I want to put a connection across the piezo alarm so I can detect when that's activated. I'll probably do something like put an Espressif board in there, like a D1 Mini or something, so that it can detect the alarm being activated and then can publish to MQTT. And once that happens, it means I can set up notifications or do whatever I want to do, because I don't know when it happens, because it'll be off in the yard somewhere and I'm in this soundproof room. So that's the first thing that I want to do to it. But for a very long time, I've also had an idea that I want to do a differential GPS project, which is where you have a reference point at a fixed location, which is reading the values coming back from GPS. And because of variations in atmospheric conditions, that's basically why GPS isn't more accurate than it already is. If you get variations in the atmosphere, then the signal coming from the GPS satellites ends up deflecting a little bit. It wavers around. You get that classic heat shimmer effect happening to light. The same thing happens to radio signals, and that's why GPS can't tell you down to the centimeter where you are. So what differential GPS does is put a GPS receiver at a fixed location where you know very accurately where it is, and a GPS receiver that is on some device that's moving. Typically this is used in farming situations like on a tractor, and you want to have self-driving on the tractor so that it's accurate to within a few centimeters. So what you do is then take the signal that is coming from the fixed position receiver and you see what GPS is telling you, which you know is different to its actual position because there'll be some variation. You take that offset, transmit the offset to the device that's moving, and then you take the value from the device that's moving, apply the same offset, and basically you're continuously correcting for the variations in the GPS signal. And the result is that the object that is moving can then have accuracy down to a couple of centimeters. Now, it's actually slightly more complicated than I've described there, because it's not enough to simply take the latitude and longitude offset and then apply it, because your two devices might be working off different satellites. You need to make sure that the two devices are seeing the exact same set of satellites and that they are processing the same signals. And that's done using an RTK engine, which is, what does it stand for? Reverse telekinematics or something? I can't remember. And so what you need is a GPS receiver which is capable not just of giving you the lat-long output, but it needs to give you the raw data from the satellites that it is using to make its calculations. And then you pass that raw data across to the other receiver, and then it can do the corrections in its RTK engine. So, Ecognito asked, you wouldn't need 2 fixed GPS points? No, you don't, because what you're not doing triangulation. What you're doing is allowing for the variation in the GPS signal. So if you've got a receiver at a fixed location and you know its latitude and longitude extremely accurately, and you take the GPS signal that's coming out from it, and GPS says that you're actually 2.3 meters over in this direction, then you know that the signal is wrong by that amount. So you take that amount and you apply that same correction in the opposite direction to the other receiver. Because if the two receivers are fairly close together, like within a kilometer or a few kilometers, they will be subjected to the same weather conditions, and the GPS signal will be getting the same variation approximately. Obviously, the closer they are together, the more they are going to be subjected to the same conditions. That's the summary. Anyway, I went off on a long thing there. So that is a really interesting topic. And what I've been wanting to do is get a couple of differential GPS receivers, put one in a fixed location on my roof, put another one on the mower, and then be able to plot them and demonstrate how differential GPS works. Okay. So there was a question. Interesting comment from Gary, who said LoraWAN is for that sweet spot where range and power are paramount. 433 megahertz and Wi-Fi, or even Bluetooth and Zigbee, are far better for local automation. Yeah, that is that's basically my thinking on it as well. I think you're right, Gary. So, there was another question back here that I saw. Oh, that's right. William said, can you share your OpenHAB config files? Right now, no, because I'm not actually running OpenHAB right now. But I'm probably going to get back to it. I've been doing this Node-RED only experiment for quite a while now. And the UI is really the big limiting factor. Having to use the Node-RED dashboard as the UI on my phone, it's very laggy. It doesn't do caching very well, so every time you open the app, in fact, let's see if I can do this in a live way so that you can see it. So I'm going to open the dashboard. I've just clicked it. It's open the screen. It's loading. So now we've got some things come up, and well, that was actually reasonably fast. You can see some charts there. You can see history of the doors opening and closing, whether they're open and closed at the moment. But just things like that. When I click on it, kitchen area, it takes a little while for the screen to update. And I think that's just because it is purely a web UI, and it's pulling all of the assets off the Node-RED server. So the friction of pulling your phone out of your pocket, opening the Node-RED dashboard and using the controls is, it's enough to be annoying. And systems like the apps for Home Assistant and OpenHab. It's a native app that runs on your phone, and then it just passes state backwards and forwards. It's not trying to effectively load a web page. So I'm very seriously considering installing OpenHab 2 and trying to get that up and going. And when that time comes, of course, I'll talk about it. Okay. Let's see what else there is. Rob said LoRa would be a good application on the mower alarm. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. It would. Particularly if you had a big yard. In my case, I've got Unify wireless access points, a couple of them, different ends of the house, and I've got excellent Wi-Fi coverage across the whole property, so that's not a problem. And there's good power in the mower. It's got a decent sized battery pack in it, so I can plug in an ESP8266 or something and not run the battery down too much. Okay. So James B says, at work, me and a co-worker are building an access control system from scratch that will communicate over TCP and maybe serial in some cases. But for TCP, would it be unheard of to use MQTT? No, it wouldn't be unheard of. But obviously, being an access control system, security is going to be your #1 issue. So you can use encryption with MQTT, and you'd need to use authentication as well, because security is not just about encryption, it's also about authentication, it's about non-repudiation. There are a whole lot of aspects to it. So I'm not going to get into that right now, but that the security of MQTT is a really interesting topic, and I think that is something that would be worth doing in an MQTT related series. So I'm going to write a note to myself about that one and pass that on, because at the moment my friend that's setting up the MQTT series of training sessions is looking for ideas about things that would be useful to cover, and this could be a good one. Okay, so Mike Conti said public GPS is not near as good as military GPS. Well, that's a curly point. It used to be different, but now we all get the same signal. There used to be a fuzzing factor that was added to the GPS signal, and it was turned off many years ago briefly. I think it was after one of the major hurricanes, because relief workers needed accurate positions, and there weren't enough military GPS receivers around that had the code in them to do the defuzzing of the signal, and so the fuzzing was turned off to allow civilian GPSs to be just as accurate as military GPSs. And I can't remember if it was ever turned back on again. It might have been turned back on briefly and then turned off for good sometime later. But there are, whether a certain GPS is good or not depends on a number of different factors. So not just how fast it can update and how accurate it is, so whether it's still within 10 meters or 1 meter or 5 centimeters or whatever, but also there are limitations like it's not legal for a GPS receiver manufacturer to sell a receiver that works above a certain speed or above a certain altitude. And I can't remember what the specific numbers are, but this is specifically to stop GPS receivers being used for building DIY cruise missiles and that sort of thing. So if you take a domestic non-military GPS receiver and you stick it into a rocket and you fire it above a certain altitude or above a certain speed, it'll stop working. And at least this used to be the case. I'm not sure if they've relaxed it now. But certainly back when I was working on ArduSat, there's a GPS receiver in ArduSat, and of course, because the satellite was going into low Earth orbit, it was deployed, I think, at about 410 kilometers altitude, and they travel at, I think it's 19,000 kilometers an hour. I can't remember the figure, but anyway, it's damn fast. It was over both the altitude and the speed limit, and a normal GPS module simply shuts down. They just refuse to give output if they are outside of normal use parameters. In order to do that, the ArduSat project had to source special GPS receivers that had that limit removed, and there had to be a chain of custody on the receiver. I think there were 5 of them. I can't remember how many GPS receivers were issued for the ArduSat project, and they had to be signed for. And the idea is basically you treat it as if it's a weapon and it can't fall into the wrong hands. So the GPS receivers that went into the satellites had to be continuous chain of custody up until the point where they're integrated into the satellite, and then the satellite itself has a chain of custody at the integration facility, and then where it goes to the launch facility, and then is launched and goes into orbit. And there had to be paperwork filed that proved that all of the units that had been issued were either returned or had been destroyed, like being burned up in the atmosphere when the satellites re-entered. So to get a GPS receiver that will work above a certain speed and above a certain altitude, there's a whole lot of red tape and hoops you've got to jump through. So in that respect, yes, not all GPS receivers are equal, but that's an artificial limitation. Okay. So RTKlib, yes, someone, I just lost that comment. Someone said, there it is. Jamie says, there's an open source project called RTKlib which does this. There's a product called Emerald GPS and I received down to 2 centimeter accuracy. Fantastic. Yeah, RTKlib is exactly the thing that I'm wanting to experiment with once I get a couple of differential GPS receivers and stick one on the mower. So getting accuracy down to 2 centimeters is reasonably common. That's what farmers use as a matter of course. It's when you start looking at farming technology, it is amazing how automated they are. The amount of work that can be done by a very small number of people with lots of very expensive, very smart machinery is incredible. Automated, everything is automated. Automatic tractors, automatic harvesters, automatic everything. So when you see pictures of fields of crops with dead straight lines, those lines are typically spaced in a way that tractor wheels can go perfectly down between the crops without damaging anything, and that's usually done using automatic tractors. So you can run a tractor down a row of crops and the tyres will go perfectly right between the rows, and the driver will just be sitting there reading a book or something, and then you can come back the next week and run the tractor down and it will be within a centimetre or 2 of the exact same position. And that's all done using differential GPS. So that sort of thing is really common in farming. Okay, a couple of comments about system. So Carl said Home Assistant is awesome. Cool. I've run Home Assistant briefly, just experimented with it. I found it very confusing at the time, but that could have been because I was coming at it from a mindset where I've been using OpenHAB for years. And often when you've been using one thing and then you switch to using something else, it's like switching PCB design software. your brain is so locked into one way of doing things that trying to do something in a different way just breaks your mind. And that was the experience I had anyway. I set up Home Assistant and started copying and pasting chunks of YAML around, and after a few hours I was going, this doesn't make any sense. So I stopped, but I really need to get back and investigate Home Assistant and learn more about it. And Rob said, being super happy with Home Assistant, I used with Node-RED and she who shall not be named automations. Yep, cool. Okay. So Aaron said, I saw your video on Tasmatizer. I was considering developing a web-based application to enable users to flash devices with various OSs. Have you considered this before? There is a project that does that, and I was actually going to do a video about it. Tasmata Web GUI. Maybe this is not quite a web UI. Is that it? No, that's not it. Oh, I've gone blank on what it's called. There is a Tasmata management interface which is being very actively developed at the moment, and what it does is scan your local network and find all of your Tasmatized devices, and you can manage them out of this dashboard, and you can do software updates and all sorts of things. So maybe that's not quite what you're talking about, but I have used it briefly and it is really cool. Right now I can't even remember what it's called, and I will cover that in the future. It's on my topic. Doing things like, this is one of the other little changes or tweaks that I'm making to the videos I do, is doing more small self-contained instructionals, because what I found is that as I'm going through and explaining a project, I'll often get to a point where I'll say something like, now install Tasmata on the device. And the question is, do I go through all of the steps of installing Tasmata every time in every video that uses it, or do I do a standalone video that says, this is just how you install Tasmata? And that way, when I get to that point in the project, I can say, go and check that out, follow those instructions, come back. And that's really how the Tasmatizer video came about. I wanted a standalone thing that just explained how to use that. And so I'm probably going to do a few more little standalone tutorials like that I can reference. And I'm planning to do one about this web management UI as well. So Brent Fraser-Weatherall asked, have you experimented with timescale DBs for MQTT data capture and logging? And the short answer is yes, and that is what's going to be coming up really soon in this air quality sensor series. That's probably going to be in part 4, I think. So part 3 is going to be a detailed walkthrough of the source code that I showed for the display version and how it generates the messages that it sends to MQTT. But then, of course, the question is, what do you do with those values once they've been published? And what you do with that, typically, is have some other service which is reading or it's subscribed to the MQTT topic where those values are being published, and then it pulls those values out, and you can either just display the latest value, which is the simplest thing, what is the value right now or when the last reading was taken, but you can also store those values in what's called a time series database, where you have a series of values over time. So you have a timeline, and you can then go back and say what was the value at that point in time. And of course that allows you to generate charts, so you can see trends over time. And I'll get to that. I've been doing that using a few different databases over the years, and I'm going to show you how to do that both the simple way using the built-in services within Node-RED, but also how to set up your own time series database. Now that is actually something that could be a standalone topic, because that's useful for so many things. So Blueman74 asked, are you running any logic in Node-RED to control lights based on movement, etc.? Yes, I am. I have motion detectors in not all, but many rooms of the house. Those motion detectors are publishing events to MQTT when they detect motion. So what I have in my Node Red setup is some flags. I wonder if I can't remember if this is exposed in the UI or not. But no, I don't think it's exposed in the UI on the purely Node Red system. What I had in OpenHab were internal variables that were things that were settings. So I could go into a config and toggle values, and the values, it's like turning a light on or off, but it was actually just turning on or off an internal flag within OpenHab, within its rules engine, that would say things like whether lighting automation is turned on for a particular room. Like you can see the door behind me, that is, there in that area is a bathroom, there's a toilet and stuff in there, and a fridge and more shelving and storage. So what I had in OpenHab was a flag that said automatic lights in the office bathroom. And what that would do is, if that flag was set and it detected motion in the bathroom, it would turn on the lights and the exhaust fan and then start a timer. And if the timer expired, it would turn those things back off again. And every time it detects motion, it would just keep resetting the timer, which means that if you go in there and then you keep moving around, the lights will stay on indefinitely. But if you go in there and then walk out, and so it doesn't detect any movement for a few minutes, it'll turn the lights off. Now, I've got similar things elsewhere, like in the garage and other places. But that sort of thing tends to really only be useful in areas where you are transiting, not where you are sitting, because occupancy and presence detection is not particularly good when you're only using motion detectors. And that opens up a huge topic, and there's actually an entire topic for it in the Discord, about presence detection and occupancy detection. So when most people talk about presence detection, what they actually mean is occupancy detection, which is there someone in this space at the time? And I think that's a really interesting distinction to make. There was a discussion about that on Discord a couple of months ago now, where occupancy detection is there someone within this space? And presence detection is, where is this person, or who is the person in this space? So that might sound like a subtle distinction, but it's a really useful one when it comes to setting up automations. That is a huge topic that I won't get into right now because it deserves lots of discussion on its own. All right, other questions. So Chris Davis said, I use HAS.io as well on the dashboard, and the ability to use the home panel is awesome. Yeah, some of the UI on both Home Assistant and OpenHab is really what makes them really nice. So that's what I'm missing at the moment. All right, let's see. Any other questions coming down here? I'm kind of skipping through on... Oh, Tasmo admin. Yes. So Ryan Massey just said Tasmo admin. That is the Tasmo admin. That is the web-based Tasmota management system. And I wonder if I can pull it up. Tasmo admin, no, I'd end up spending ages screwing around with it while you're bored and waiting. But the thing to have a look at if you want to look at a web-based management system for Tasmota devices is Tasmo admin. Mitchell asked why not look at IO Broker instead of Home Assistant or Node Red. I'm open to looking at IO Broker. I don't know about IO Broker. Okay. Yeah. It's getting down questions. Not real coffee. Where are we? Oh, here's an interesting question. Gary said, has anybody else used a SON-off T1 type switch as just an MQTT publisher? I use a T1 UK 2-gang switch as a boiler remote control, but just publishing MQTT, no relay use at all. Anyone? Now, I haven't personally done that with a T1 type switch, but if you are using Tasmota on it, that shouldn't be a problem at all. Obviously, you've got it working, it sounds like, but if anybody else is using them as an MQTT publisher, that would be interesting as well. So that is, light switches are a tricky problem. Yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole right now. That's going to be a whole series coming up very, very soon. So Doug Wheeler said, we need some simple, inexpensive BLE beacons for locating people by the location of their phone. Now that is something that I really went into in a lot of detail a couple of years ago. In fact, I have this. Unfortunately, these are out of production, but they are open source, so you can always make more of your own. That's an iBeacon, so it's a BLE beacon. If someone doesn't have a phone with them, then you can use this attached to the keyring, and that becomes a device that you can then track. But the interesting part of all of this is these. It's the Happy Bubbles technology. I don't remember what they call this particular thing. So this device, it's got an ESP8266 on it. That is a BLE module, and it has USB for power, obviously. Now, if you're doing this now, you probably do it with an ESP32 because it's got BLE built in. But this was done before the ESP32 came out. And the idea is that what you would do is place these around your house at fixed locations, and they would do signal strength analysis of all the BLE devices, and then they report back to a central service, which does some triangulation, and then it gives you a location of all the BLE devices within your environment. So you can then define regions like lounge room, kitchen, or whatever, and you can then look at the MAC address of the BLE device and associate it with someone. So you could say the MAC address of this phone is John, and wherever this phone is where I am. And Ryan said, is that a Node MCU board and a beacon? Yes, I think it is. Looks like a Node MCU board to me. And that that sounds like a really good way of solving the problem, but it turns out not to be so much for a couple of reasons. One is that a phone typically will not act as a permanent BLE beacon when there is no, when the app is not in the foreground. So in order to make this phone, for example, work as a BLE beacon, you have to run an app. But because of the security settings, I can't remember if it's iOS or Android, one or the other, when the app is not in the foreground, it stops being a beacon. So that means you cannot, you can't rely on the phone, basically, is a short answer. So you need something like this, which means you've got to convince people to carry a little token around with them, which is really annoying. And it's just not practical. And the other aspect is, even if you can make the phone act as a permanent BLE beacon through software in whatever way, people will walk into the kitchen, put it on the charger and walk away, and then you can't track the person by their phone anymore. So it's one of those things that sounds like a perfect solution to the problem, and when you actually put it into practice, turns out there are all sorts of issues with it. So cool idea, and I wanted to do a whole series on that, but I probably won't because it's not that useful. Now, there are certain situations where it can be useful, and that is tracking objects that you can attach these things to. Now, if you've seen Tile or some of those other like find your keys type devices where you attach a little token to an object and then you can track it using your phone, and uses other people's phones as well to track it, that's the exact same system. That's what this is doing. So it can be useful if you have an object that you want to attach it to. And in fact, there is a really cool application of this at the Melbourne Hackerspace. What they've got is BLE beacons attached to the rubbish bins, and there are a couple of receivers. Can't even remember what it is. I think it might be a Raspberry Pi, maybe. There is one near the back door of the hackerspace, and so the system can tell if the bin is out or not, and if it's bin night and the bin hasn't been put out, it sends a warning saying, the bin needs to go out. So if you have an object that you want to be able to track and you can attach a tile to it permanently or a BLE beacon, then that sort of system, like using the Happy Bubbles type things, can work fine. So that is an option. All right. Open MQTT for BLE is awesome. What is Open MQTT? MQTT, I've never heard of that. There's the Open MQTT gateway. I don't know what that does, but that sounds like it's worth looking at. So according to the docs, it says that it's a project to concentrate in one gateway different technologies, decreasing the number of proprietary gateways needed, and hiding them all behind MQTT. So that's RF, LoRa, BLE, GSM, infrared, and then a whole lot of other devices, OpenHAB, Domotics, Node-RED, Home Assistant, etc. Oh, I hadn't heard of that. That looks like it's worth looking at. All right. What else is there on here? Yeah, Doug Wheeler said, Tile and similar things are sort of backward, using moving phones to locate a beacon rather than using fixed beacons to locate a moving phone. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's the same technology, just applied slightly differently. And it relies on the phone knowing its location based on GPS or whatever other location services that it uses. And the phone could be moving, so you've got a moving reference point. The interesting thing about this is that you have fixed reference points to work from. Peter said Apple AWB chips in their new phones are going to do presence detection. They're going to put them in their new watches as well, and you'll be able to know where anyone is in the house. I hadn't heard of that. That's interesting. Jordan asked, what beacons do you recommend if we want to track objects? I don't have enough real-world experience to make a recommendation on that. There are a number of systems around, and it probably matters more what software you're going to be using to integrate with it than the beacons themselves. And in a system like Tile, which is like a key finder system, what it really relies on is critical mass of people in the area with the app installed on their phones. And so it's one of those things where popularity matters. If there are lots of people in the area using a particular BLE-based location service, you really need to go with whatever is popular, because it gives you the most chance that the device you're looking for is going to be near someone's phone that has the app installed on it. interesting. Mitchell said, I've been using Ubuntu while, no, not Ubuntu, UBNT, so Ubiquiti Network's wireless to track your user location. I've been thinking about that too, because our access points, of course, are on a fixed location. We know where they are within the house. We should be able to do RSSI calculations off them. So that is kind of cool. And Ryan also asked, anyone know any great video doorbells? That is a great question, and it's something that I would like to get to in the future. I know that there are places you can check out reviews of video doorbells, and there was all the controversy recently about the Ring doorbell and how insecure it is. There is, let's see, just recently there was a review of video doorbells, and who did it? It was the Hookup, I believe. Let's see, the best battery video doorbell. Here we go. I'll do some promotion of another channel. And Mitchell said, IO Broker has a Ubiquiti Networks controller link so you can easily pull client information. That's cool. I am definitely going to have to look into IO Broker. Thank you very much for the pointer on that. Yeah, and Ryan said, parents want me to install Ring, but I can't come around to that. Need something that is secure and local. Yes. When we were doing the big renovations to this house, it was just before video doorbells really became a thing. And my intention had been to make my own video doorbell, and I put all the cable in the wall for it. So at my front door there is Ethernet in the wall directly behind where the doorbell needs to go. And the reason for that was that I was going to put a camera there and build my own video doorbell that was totally local, so it would just run on the local LAN. And my idea had been to use something like a Raspberry Pi with a camera and have total control over it. And then that was around the time that various video doorbells started coming out, and you could just go down to the hardware store and buy one and install one, so I didn't end up making one myself. The result is that we still have no doorbell. So that's a project that I want to come back to. Oh, Mitchell just said, what about building your own video doorbell? Yes, exactly. That was the plan. Okay. Alrighty. Well, I think I'm almost caught up. I know that I skipped a whole bunch of questions because I was kind of just scanning down, so sorry if I missed your question, but I've been trying to keep up with the chat. Yeah, and Mitchell said, for my doorbell, we just got a SIP-based IP intercom and I host my own SIP server with video. Can get the call on my phone with video as well. Might be easier and safer than Ring. That is a really cool solution. So what I had in mind, like the vague plan that I had when I was looking at doing this years and years ago, was maybe to run something like Skype on the device so that when you press the button it initiates a Skype call. So I would get an incoming Skype video call from my front door, and I could then answer it and talk to whoever was there and see them. And doing a system with, say, a Raspberry Pi gives you lots of flexibility. You can control all of that sort of thing. Ubiquiti debacle. So Dodgy Brothers Engineering said something about a Ubiquiti debacle. Where is that? I don't know how much I trust Ubiquiti after that recent debacle. Okay. I think what Dodgy is referring to here is that not long ago, it was a few months ago now, Ubiquiti pushed out a software update that turned on telemetry by default. And what that means is that Ubiquiti devices started reporting back to base different things about what they were doing. And then there was a public outcry about it, because what it meant is that Ubiquiti themselves could see what people were doing with their devices, when there was the expectation that if you had a device and you were controlling it, you had some degree of privacy. And then because there was this big outcry, Ubiquiti very quickly pushed out another update which turned it into a radio button so you could turn it off, and I think they changed it to be off by default. I can't remember. But yeah, that was certainly a misstep on their part. And I can understand from their point of view why they would want that to be on, but the way they went about it was kind of underhanded. The idea of having all of these people that are using your products, and you push out a software update to it that all of a sudden starts reporting back what those people are doing with your products, gives you a huge amount of intelligence that you can use to improve your products and see what features people are using and what's good and what's bad, where you should put your effort. From that point of view, it's totally understandable. It's very useful. But at an individual point of view, it means that they then have the ability to look at an individual user or customer and see what is going on with their devices. And that is a breach of privacy. So, yeah, I think they learned from that. From what I've seen, Ubiquiti seem to be reasonably decent as a company. Their gear certainly seems to be good quality. I think they screwed up with that decision, but I have Ubiquiti gear in my house, and I've made sure that all of my firmware is updated to the most recent, so it's now got the option to turn off the telemetry. So, yeah. Oh, Mitchell just said they've enabled it again, by the way, Ubiquiti. Interesting, I hadn't heard about that. Okay. Yeah. Dodgy said, not just perceived, real. Yeah. This is touching on a topic that I would really like to talk about in a lot more detail, because I've had first-hand experience of this. The whole concept of information leakage, and what's the term for it? I mean, a lot of people call it metadata, but as my friend Andy says, there is no metadata, there is only data. Information about information is still information. So the whole concept of being able to gain knowledge of what someone is doing by looking at information around what they are doing. For example, you don't necessarily need to know, say you want to know someone's location and you want to know if they are home or not. You don't need to track their location directly. You can get that by looking at the power usage of their house. So if you have access to some kind of a smart power metering system, you can tell if a house is occupied by the type of activity that happens in it. And there are lots of things like that. That particular example is very relevant to me because many years ago I worked on a power management reporting system that was deployed in a big shopping centre in Sydney, and there was a partial deployment or a trial deployment at a big private school here in Melbourne, and the idea was to be able to track energy usage across classrooms, or in the case of the shopping centre, across things like their HVAC system and their lighting and everything else, and save money by turning off services when they're not required. But the result of instrumenting these things is a huge amount of insight that you might not expect. Once you start measuring something in detail, you can infer all sorts of information about what's going on around that, not just the thing itself. And power is a perfect example, because you can say, what is the breach of privacy of monitoring power? But if you start monitoring power, you can monitor sometimes whether a house is occupied, how many people are in the house. You can often tell where they are in the house, which comes back to our occupancy detection. And you don't even necessarily need to do that by measuring individual devices. Just if you have a reasonably accurate overall power figure for a house that is being updated reasonably frequently, you can tell when certain lights get turned on and off. So you can then tell when someone has gone into a room and then left the room, and you can infer a huge amount of information just by watching one number. In fact, I've told this story before. I might as well tell it now. While we were working on this energy monitoring project quite some years ago, this was at my old software company, Ubiquiti. We had a meeting with the client, and this was one of those moments where like a light bulb came on for me, and I suddenly understood the implications of what we were working on. As we were doing this project, we were building so there are multiple components to something like a building energy management system, or an energy management system that's deployed across a large facility. You need to be able to acquire the data, and often that requires things like devices within the switchboard that are measuring the power consumption on individual circuits and then reporting it back. And in the case of of both the shopping centre and the school that we were doing these deployments at, they were using Siemens switchboards and energy reporting systems. So the Siemens devices were reporting instantaneous power usage across a whole bunch of different circuits. We weren't taking care of that. We were doing the software side of it, where we acquire the data, pull it into a database. We were then generating a map of the facility and showing where in the facility the power was being used. So it was a heat map, and you could see, there's a hot spot over here, which means there's lots of power being used in this particular building. And then you could see the temperature change on these different parts of the facility, which meant the power level was changing. So while we were working on the user interface part of it, we didn't have access to the live data feeds from these client sites, and we wanted to be able to have reasonably good representations of the data feeds. So I designed, it's more than, it must be 12 years ago now, 13 years ago, because it was before Practical Arduino came out, which was 2009. And I designed a number of power monitoring boxes. In fact, I still have some of them here. I could pull one out and show you. And what they did was use current clamps, an Arduino Uno. In fact, it was before the Uno came out, so it would have been a 10.000, and a Wi-Fi shield. And what we did was install these devices in the switchboards of my house and a few of our staff, people that were volunteering because they thought this was an interesting thing to do. So what we did was put the box in the switchboard with current clamps around a couple of the circuits and around the main power circuit for the house. So what we would then do is read that data and then report it back to our central system, which was running in our data center, and that would log it in time series database, and then we would be able to plot power in the houses. So getting back to the point of this story, what happened was that in one of our in the house of one of my staff, who was actually a user interface designer, he'd been working on the user interface of how we represent this data with the time-based charts and the heat map. And we've been acquiring data from a few houses, like our staff's houses, for I think a couple of weeks at this point. And we had this meeting at, I think it started at 9 o'clock with the client. And the client came in, we were sitting in the boardroom, we had a few people in there, and we were demonstrating the user interface, and this staff member of mine pulled up the live feed, the interface showing his own house. And we were looking at it and talking to the client and saying, oh look, it's pulling, I can't remember the figures, I'll just make it up. And it was saying, oh look, the house is currently pulling 350 watts. And like it looks like there's nobody there. So it's just sitting there, power is flatlined, it's not doing anything. And then as we were talking, we saw the power jump up by like 60 watts. So the chart did a little dog leg up, and then it did another little dog leg up, and then all of a sudden it jumped by 2 and a bit kilowatts, and then it did a little drop down, and my UI guy who was talking to the customer and explaining it said, oh look, my wife has just got home from dropping off the kids at school. You can see she walked in the front door and turned on the hall light, and then she walked into the kitchen and turned on the kitchen light, and then she started the kettle because she wants to make a cup of coffee, and then she turned off the hall light. And we could see this whole sequence just by watching this one chart of the overall power usage of the house. And when I saw that, so sitting in this meeting, I was suddenly struck by, wow, how much you can infer from just one number and watching it change. And so that whole issue of metadata as being harmless, I don't think it's harmless at all. So-called metadata, which is really just data, is information that can be used to infer a whole lot of extra behavior about whatever is going on. So anyway, that's my little story. So I would like to do a discussion at some point about this whole thing about privacy and inferring things from data that you wouldn't normally consider to be particularly privacy critical. Okay, so let's see what else came up while I was doing that little rant. Okay. F Anvil. Mike said, F Anvil seems very good. Have their desk phones. Oh, and hi Mike. Cool to have you on here. What is F Anvil? Oh, okay. Soup phones. Yep. Cool. Interesting to know. And Mitchell said, I deploy F Anvil to clients, never had issues, love them. Cool. All right. So, oh yeah, and Toby Robb said power signatures. Now that's getting into a whole extra level of sophistication. So what Toby is talking about there is different devices use power in different ways. And if you are doing a fairly detailed analysis of the power that is traveling through a wire, you can often tell what the type of device is to far more detail than simply a number. The simple way to look at it is how much power is being pulled right now. But by analyzing the waveform of the power, you can do things like figure out whether the load is highly inductive or not, and a whole lot of other attributes. So you might have two devices that both pull the same amount of power, but you can distinguish between them by analyzing how that power is being used. So there are devices out there which you can add to your switchboard which do this power signature analysis, and they have an internal database of a whole lot of different devices they already know about. So what you can do is attach it to your the power in your switchboard, let it run for a while, like a few hours or whatever, and it will come back with a report, and it will say you have a GE fridge of this particular model and you have this type of dishwasher, because it knows how those devices use power and it can fingerprint them. So that's kind of both clever and scary as well. That's a whole extra level of insight into the devices that are on your system. But even without going to that level of detail, just by looking at numbers, you can still tell a huge amount. Yeah. Okay, so here's an interesting one. MSW Dev said, what do you think about PoE lighting? I don't know. It's one of those things that seems like it should be interesting, but I kind of can't figure out why. And I think partly that's because PoE, like proper PoE, 802.3 AF, like AT standard, is expensive per port. If you buy a 24-port Ethernet switch with full PoE, yeah, you're looking at $700-ish. I don't know, there are cheaper ones as well. And they also tend to be noisy, they're physically large, and it's interesting because it means you can simply plug the thing in. Just to backtrack a little bit, what this is in relation to is things like lighting panels that are used in offices, which are traditionally wired by plugging mains into them, but you can now also get lighting that from Ubiquiti, as an example, which just has an Ethernet connection on the back of it. So you just plug an Ethernet cable into the back of your lighting panel in the office of your ceiling of your office, and it gets its power from the network connection over power over Ethernet from your injector or your switch, and you can send commands to it. So you can, dim it or turn it on or off or change its color temperature or whatever, like a smart bulb. And I don't know. As I said, I want to like them, and I don't really see a huge benefit to it. It means that you're wiring PoE and Ethernet everywhere instead of wiring just power. So if someone has opinions on that, I would love to hear it. If someone has first-hand experience with it, I think this might be one of those situations where the benefits are not obvious. And if you install it, you then find that it's useful in ways that you didn't expect. And because I haven't used it, I haven't seen that. So if anyone has done PoE for lighting, I would really like to know what your experience has been with it. Thierry asked, this school didn't happen to be in the chatty vicinity, was it? Kind of, is what I'll say. It was not directly in Chadstone. It was more around it's sort of southeast part of Melbourne, but it was more around the Kew area. I'll say that. That's about as much as I'll say. Okay. Yeah. Dodgy made a very good observation, which I totally agree with, which is just because you have nothing to hide doesn't mean you aren't entitled to your privacy. I totally agree with that. The whole thing people say about, well, if you've got nothing to hide, then why do you care? I don't like that. Okay. Mitch B. Electronics asked, any tips for young players getting into the home automation industry? I'm 16 and I'm starting an electrical apprenticeship with plans to go into home automation. That is a cool question. And Mitch, welcome. But I can't say I'm in the home automation industry. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm a hobbyist who sits at home and hacks around on it and designs things to solve my own problems because this is a hobby and I think it's fascinating and I like solving problems. It's I basically treat the house as if it's a big playground and like a big Lego set, and I want to be able to modify things and control them but I have fairly limited experience of doing this with other people's houses and in different circumstances. I did some work for a while for a company that does electric blinds, and I designed a Wi-Fi and RF controller that goes inside the blind tube, like the tube of the blind, and controls a motor so that you could send a signal and open and close the blinds. And those got installed into houses all over the place. But that's probably about as close as I've come to doing commercial home automation, and that wasn't me doing the installation. I did the design of the controller, and yeah, so I don't know that I've got tips for getting into the home automation industry. I think it's cool that you are, and if you're doing an electrical apprenticeship, considering how much home automation has changed over the last couple of years and how popular it has become as a point solution now that it's really a consumer, it's like a collection of consumer products. It's not what it was 10 or 20 years ago when you'd have to do like an entire C-bus installation. I think as an electrical apprentice, to be honest, I envy the position you're in right now, because I found that in my position, I'm not allowed to do anything really. I have to get an electrician to make changes when there are things that I could probably do myself, and so that's a big limiting factor. If you are going through your apprenticeship now, so you're 16, doing your electrical apprenticeship, if you complete that, I'm not sure whether you've just started or how long you've been doing it, but if you get through that and you become licensed as an electrician, it opens up all sorts of possibilities that aren't available to people like me who are coming at it more from the IT side of it, because I have a background in IT and software development and in electronics design. I don't have the background as an electrician, which means I haven't been through the process you're going through, where you learn about the regulations, the safe way to do things, the correct way to do things, and that is really important. So if you get through that period, the thing is that for me right now, I can design devices that are mains powered, but I can't install them. And to be allowed to install them, I would have to go off and do a 4-year apprenticeship and become a licensed electrician. So, and there's no plan B. There's no other way I could possibly get the certificate to do it. So if you get through this and finish your apprenticeship, that puts you in a fantastic position for many years to come to pursue this in whatever way you like. You might then want to get into more of the IT side of things and setting up end devices in people's houses, setting up control systems or whatever. But having the ticket that allows you to do the mains wiring is a huge asset. So my personal advice, not having been through that process, is keep going with your apprenticeship, and if you get to the other end with your ticket, that is fantastic. Keep going. Okay. A couple of interesting comments in relation to PoE lighting. Stefan said at work we did it for a cheap way of making emergency lighting if switches on the UPS. And Michael said PoE lights good in a blackout, easier to connect to a UPS. That's a really good point. So if you are running your PoE switch on a UPS, it means your lighting keeps working. Obviously, the power used by that switch is going to be up significantly, so the load on UPS will be higher. But yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and Doug made the point PoE would be point-to-point power, which isn't very efficient for general power delivery. It's also fairly low power, so you still need standard AC for many other devices. Yeah, that's true. So you would never have a PoE washing machine or clothes dryer or whatever, because you need 2,000 watts to run it. You can't deliver 2,000 watts over PoE. So, let's see. Oh, Toby's advice in regards to the apprenticeship was, once you get a year or two into your apprenticeship, build a home system for yourself. Yeah, so getting hands-on with this is really good. There's a question from Charles about housing standards. Do you think national housing standards should change to include more smarts, change from dumb to smart houses? I think the housing standards need to allow more smarts, as in they should not exclude it. What I mean by that distinction is, I don't think it's necessarily useful to require it, but I think they should be written in a way that allows it more easily. Now, the thing is that standards are different all over the world. So what I say here in relation to one country may not be relevant in another. But one thing that we're seeing is that in different places there are regulations that are changing, like requiring a neutral at every light switch. The traditional way of wiring a light switch is that you have active and neutral that go to the light itself, and then the active line loops down to the light switch and is switched and then goes back to the load. So at a typical light switch, if you take the wall panel off, you'll have an active coming down, and then you'll have the switched active going back out to the load. And as we've seen with things like the no neutral sign-off video I did a while ago, that is a real pain if you want to put any kind of smart device at the light switch location, because you don't have power to run the local electronics unless you do, frankly, stupid tricks to run a no neutral type system. If you have an active and a neutral going to the light switch location, it basically makes that problem go away. You can power whatever device you like at the light switch location. So in some countries now, I think it's legally required on new installations that light switches have both active and neutral wired to them, and that is future-proofing them against smart light switches and other things. Yes, and some more advice for Mitch, the apprentice electrician. John Cronk said, Mitch, don't specialise too soon. Always have a plan B and plan C. Like John says, things are moving at light speed. Yeah. And if you look at the state of the home automation industry 10 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago, which for an apprentice who is 16 years old now, and thinking back to what was home automation like 20 years ago, it's before they were born, it might seem like the dark ages. 20 years is not that long in terms of your career. But the way the world is now compared to 20 years ago, it is totally different. So what you learn now gives you the foundation, but then you have to be ready to adapt. Make sure you have those foundations. Artieri says, in the school I'm thinking about had a Siemens system. I just remember the BMS, which is building management system, guys being a bit cagey about what they were doing. Yeah, maybe it was the same. I don't know. Siemens building management systems seem to be very popular. Siemens is one of those companies that sort of skirts on the edge of being a consumer brand, but isn't really. And if you look at, people know the Siemens name, big German engineering company, and they make devices that you see around the place. but typically they don't make devices that you walk into like a box goods store and buy a Siemens toaster or something. They're more large-scale engineering. Everybody knows who Siemens is, but the scope of what they make is just crazy, and they are everywhere. Their equipment is in like factories and houses and machinery and trains and pretty much everything. So if you go into big shopping centers or any like large installations, they probably got, and you go behind the scenes, they'll have Siemens gear floor to ceiling. Okay. Thoughts on algebra? I don't know what that question means. Doug Wheeler makes an extremely good point here. He says, the technology is changing too fast to make as required. As hobbyists, we're okay tweaking our systems constantly. The average homeowner needs the same system to work for 20 to 30 years. Yes, and this is also a point that I made obliquely in my video about wires, not Wi-Fi, for home automation. And the point being, do you currently still run a wireless access point that you bought 30 years ago? Right, I'm sure the answer is no. But if you walk into a house that was built 30 years ago with hardwired light switches, of course they still work. The wire still works. So you really need to think about the scale of the lifetime of the building, not just, I'm going to make this and I'm going to be careful about maintaining firmware updates for the next 12 months and then I'm going to forget about it. No, you need to think about, I'm putting in something that needs to work 20 years from now. All right. Well, we're heading up towards 2 hours, so I'm going to wrap it up. In a second. So, Espero asked, do you ever watch TV or is most of your time in your office and lab? Most of my time is here. I do watch, sometimes I have Netflix or something running on a screen here while I'm working, particularly if I'm doing something that doesn't need much thought. But I don't watch a whole lot of TV. So, and Mike Conti said, I got into home automation in '97. Man, things have changed. Yes. Yes. You would have seen big changes from '97. Back in '97, if you wanted to do home automation, you would go to a company like, well, you would do something like spend $100,000 on a C-bus installation, just like as the base level, and then the price goes up from there. Now it's much more around point solutions. Instead of rewiring your entire house from scratch, it's replace one device here and one device there, and then do it progressively over time. Yeah, and okay, so I think I will have to wrap it up, but there is another interesting little point here. CJ said, my philosophy has always been add smart to what is already there, lights, etc. Don't take away functionality. I 100% agree. And I've come to that conclusion about through experience. Now, there is I don't know what I can say in terms of privacy here, but there is a very good friend of mine, actually the same friend who is working on the MQTT series of seminars, who spent many years working for a certain very rich Melbourne entrepreneur on his home automation system. And after this person made a bucket load of money in software in the early .com boom, and bought a house and totally gutted it, and they rewired it for automation. This was in the mid-90s. And one of the briefs, so his idea when he started this was that he wanted the entire house to be automatic. And so he set out a number of specific challenges for the people that were working on it. And he hired a team of engineers to work full-time for years on his house. That's how much money was put into this project. And one of his dot points in his brief was no light switches. He wanted all of the lighting to be 100% automatic without any way of controlling it manually. And the engineers who were working on it argued the point and said, no, you really do need some way of overriding control and being able to just walk up to the wall and flick a switch and control the lights. But he was adamant. He said, no light switches. So all of the light switches are removed from the house. Well, the whole house was rewired, and it was all based on motion detection and various other things. And there are some interesting stories about that project that I've heard as well that I could pass on. I won't get into right now. But that turned out to be a difficulty, and my own experience with just changing the light switches in my house is that changing from the traditional the flip light switch to a button light switch is enough to freak people out and make them unable to turn lights on in my house. And that's when there is a light switch on the wall. It's not really that much different. I mean, I'm sure most of you have seen the light switches that I use. Here's a box of them right here. Oh, here's one of the early generation ones that I showed in the video. But okay, so this is an example of one of my current light switches. It's got the socket on the back, RJ45 socket for the twisted pair cable. And this is the sort of thing that is currently on the wall in my house. And it replaces what would have been there before, which would have been, in this case, 3 light switches that you toggle. Instead of toggling them, you walk up and press them. And you turn the lights on, press it, turn the lights off. That change alone is enough that almost everyone that comes to my house is unable to control the lights. They can't work it out. So that has really taught me that what we need to do is make sure that whatever the expected behavior and the expected interface is still works. And then we can add functionality on top of that. We can layer things and have other ways of controlling it, like turning lights on automatically when it detects motion. But you also need to be able to walk up and turn the light on manually or turn it off and force behavior by manually overriding it. So I'm going to wrap it up there, I think. There are a few more questions coming through, talking about X10, C-Bus, other things, RFID trigger, all sorts of interesting topics. Z-Wave, PLCs, but that's been a couple of hours, and I need to get on with finishing the software walkthrough on the air quality sensor and get that out. Hopefully that'll be out within the next couple of days, because I've already mostly filmed it. That was originally intended to be embedded as a section within part 2, and when it got to 25 minutes and I hadn't even finished yet of that particular section, I decided to pull it out into its own standalone episode. But the result is that it's 90% there. I've just got to do a new intro and outro and a little bit more tweaks to it, and then I'll be able to release it. So probably in the next few days I will have the next episode up, which will be the almost line by line walkthrough of the source code for that project. So we can pick up with more questions next week. Please join the Discord, and everyone hit the like button. Thank you. And I will see you next week. I hope you're all having a great Easter weekend, and come and chat on the Discord or in the forum. I'm not so good at keeping up with the forum, but I try to pay attention to the Discord as much as I can. It's on my screen right here, visible to me all the time. So have a happy Easter. And if I can figure out how to end this live stream, I will jump to the end slide and say bye. Thanks for coming.